first event in a series for agricultural innovators. Today, our event is called Opportunities in Agricultural Innovation. We have some terrific speakers with us today with a lot of great insight, some really great things that I think you'll learn, and hopefully maybe make some connections with these folks as well. So this series that we're doing is new for Nebraska Business Development Center, looking at doing events that are targeting training and ways for innovators that have technologies specifically that would benefit agricultural innovators and support rural development. And so we're doing virtual training right now and doing several events basically now from June until October. At the end of the presentation, I'll show you a list of those events and opportunities to engage further and find out about how you might have an opportunity to pursue some of those events that we have coming up. So this morning, we're going to hear from 5 different individuals: Brian Williams with Nebraska Public Power District, Jay Rempe with Nebraska Farm Bureau, Boone McAfee with Nebraska Corn Board, Nate Bloom with Nebraska Grain Sorghum Board, and Becky Vogt with the Nebraska Rural Poll, which is a collaboration that's part of the UNL Department of Agricultural Economics, Rural Futures Institute in Nebraska Extension. We also want to give special thanks to the team at the Combine. The Combine is an accelerator for agricultural startups. They have a space there in Lincoln and do events and trainings for those ag tech entrepreneurs. Matt Foley has been a tremendous asset and friend to NBDC as we put together this program and series events and connecting with individuals. So we're incredibly grateful for the Combine and connected with that in Invest Nebraska. So first, we'll start off by each of the speakers talking about their organizations and their research, give a little bit of an overview on each of them, and then we'll do a moderated panel of questions. And from there, we want you to submit your questions as well, things that you want to know about that are going on with the industry, and maybe topic areas that they are going to have in-depth knowledge about. So if you would like to submit a question, you can do so through the chat function. You can send it to the panel or to the entire audience, which would allow them to see whether or not that question has been presented. We will answer those questions after the moderated panel. If for some reason the chat function is not working for you, you can go ahead and email those questions to Josh Nicholcaddy. His email is jnicolcaddy@unomaha.edu. If you go down to the bottom of your screen, you should be able to pull up the Zoom toolbar, and from there you can click the option to push the chat box and then enter your question. First up, we are going to hear from Jay Rempe with Nebraska Farm Bureau. I will go ahead and turn it over to you, Jay.
Well, thank you, Sarah. Thank you very much to you and the Nebraska Business Development Center for this opportunity. And the topic area, I think, is very timely. Ag innovation. A lot is happening in agriculture right now, and it's even though we're running through some uncertain times economically, I think that innovatively and technology-wise, there are a lot of things happening, and I'm glad to be part of this. So if you go to the next slide, I'll talk a little bit about the Nebraska Farm Bureau, what we are and what we're about real quick. We are Nebraska's largest farm organization. We are statewide. We are a general farm organization. That means we represent producers and growers of all kinds of commodities, be it beef, pork, corn, soybeans, sunflowers, sugar beets, you name it. If it's grown in Nebraska, we probably have a member that's a part of our organization that grows it. Our overall goal, to paraphrase, really is to enhance agriculture in this state. And we try to do that through advocacy efforts, education efforts, and leadership programs. And again, we're statewide farmers and ranchers. We have members all across the state. We were begun in 1917, so we just celebrated our 100th anniversary a couple years ago. So we've been around a while as well, too. You can go to the next slide, Sarah. So one of the things we do related to this topic of innovation is our national affiliate, American Farm Bureau Federation, working with farm credit, primarily services, farm credit services, and some other entities have started a competition a few years back. It's called the Ag Innovation Challenge. And the idea is for small businesses and startup companies to compete to try to develop innovative solutions to challenges faced by farmers and ranchers. So I think it's right up the alley with what we're talking about today. You can see there's a considerable prize package of $145,000 that are awarded to 10 businesses at the culmination of it. You can see the breakdown there of the money and how it's distributed, but it all culminates in a competition in a live pitch at our American Farm Bureau convention in San Diego in January of 2021. So if anybody on here has an interest in that, you can please contact me or just go to American Farm Bureau's webpage and look for Ag Innovation Challenge. Nebraska has had participants in this in the past, and in fact, we've had people make the finalist list, and I believe we may have even had a winner a couple of years back from Nebraska. So Nebraska has done well in this competition in the past, and I'd encourage anybody to look into it a little further. You can go to the next slide, Sarah. So I am the economist for Nebraska Farm Bureau. It's a role that we created about 5 years ago. My goal is to kind of look at things that are happening in agriculture from an economic vantage point and do some policy analysis to help our members on the ground and maintain economically viable farms and ranches, and then to help our goals overall from a Farm Bureau standpoint in terms of our lobbying and advocacy efforts. And there's 3 areas where I do that: through outreach, through data and information, and some Outlook activities, and then of course research and analysis. So a lot of that involves following the trends and things that are happening in agriculture, the economy, the farm income levels, the debt levels, international trade, farm policy, tax policy, all those kind of things. But we do try to follow what's happening in the way of innovation and research and trends in those areas as well too. And just, I'll give you a couple examples of that. You can go to the next slide, Sarah. So one thing we obviously follow is the adoption of precision technology in the state. This chart came from the University of Nebraska, Lincoln. It was a master's study that was done by an individual in the Ag Econ department that was released a couple of years ago. The data is a little dated, but you can see the kinds of technologies that are being adopted on Nebraska's farms across the state. The top 3 lines are the green, orange, and yellow lines. The green is grid soil sampling. The yellow is GPS, auto steering. And then the orange line is the yield monitors with GPS. So back in 2014, when this was last done, those were over 70% of the farmers out there had adopted those kind of technologies. You can see the technology really took off in the middle 2000s, and things have really grown since then. Again, this is a little dated. I would guess you could see there's a couple brown lines at the 50% that represent variable rate technologies, both planting and fertilizer applications. I would suspect if you were to do that today in 2020, that those 2 would be considerably higher. I'm continuing to hear anecdotal evidence of farmers adopting the variable rate technologies. You can go to the next slide, Sarah. Another example of some of the things we kind of follow, obviously, is that there's a lot of technology happening in seeds with the genetics and GMOs and some of the new things that are happening with CRISPR technology and all those. And one of the things we like to look at is the adoption of those kind of technologies by Nebraska farmers. And you can see here's just one example. This came from a USDA study of the adoption of drought resistant seed in their share of the acres, and Nebraska led the nation in that regard. 42% of the corn acres, I believe it was drought resistant. And so you can see that, again, Nebraska farmers are readily adapting to new technologies. They're looking at innovation, and they're wanting to look at those kind of innovations that will improve their operations. And then my last slide, Sarah. And the last thing I'll share with you is just a little bit as we think about innovation and where things are heading in agriculture. This is kind of a compilation of some things that I've seen and looked and read in terms of what the farmers of the future might look like. And so as we think about how innovation will play into that, these are some areas where we might want to have a conversation. But first, farmers of the future are going to be business savvy. They're going to be much more conversant in managing businesses, managing people, capital investments, inflows, return on investment, all those kinds of things will become more and more prevalent in their businesses and their decision making. They're going to be much more conversant in technology, in the sense that you think about the farmers that are up and coming grew up with a lot of these cell phone technologies, computer technologies that some of us at a certain age group didn't have when we were kids. So that, as time moves on, that technology is just going to become second nature to them. Part of that is going to be managing farm data. There's a lot of data coming to farmers, and trying to manage all that production data, the marketing data, the financial data, and put it into a form where they can make some decisions based on that is going to be a trick. And then I think what we're going to see is farmers are reaching out, and much more networks involved in the farming operation, consultants, custom service providers, which I think provide a lot of room for innovation. And then there's going to be demand for technicians and engineers and professionals to deal with all this technology. So it's a little bit of a snapshot, I think, of what farming for the future might look like. And then I'll quit there and let the others take over, and be looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Jay. We appreciate your input, and we will hear more as we do the moderated panel. So up next, we will hear from Boone McAfee. He is with the Nebraska Corn Board. Boone, I'll turn it to you.
Great, thanks, Sarah. And if you want to just go to the next slide already, that'd be fine. There we go. So like Sarah said, I'm Boone McAfee. I'm on staff with the Nebraska Corn Board, and I serve as our Director of Research and Stewardship. If you're not familiar with the Corn Board, our board consists of 9 board members who are all corn farmers in Nebraska, and they're really charged with the responsibility of allocating how Nebraska corn checkoff funds are invested into programs of market development, research, education, and promotion. And so how the checkoff works is that in Nebraska, when a corn farmer sells their corn for the first time to an ethanol plant, to a feedlot, or any other first purchaser, 1/2 cent is collected to go towards the checkoff. So these funds really kind of represent the investment of about 21,000 corn producers across the state, used to create opportunities for corn, and really do collectively what no individual corn farmer may be able to do on their own. Again, in terms of market development, research, education, and promotion. So the vision of our board is really to enhance demand, add value, and ensure sustainability of corn production and the industry as a whole. And so kind of using that vision as a guide, I want to just give a brief overview of how maybe we look at research and innovation in the work that we do on behalf of Nebraska's corn farmers. So Sarah, if you want to go to the next slide. So just kind of give a snapshot of Nebraska's corn industry. Current use for corn and the primary sectors for corn demand are ethanol, feed, and export. And although very small right now, there's that little sliver on the graph that says other uses, and that includes things like food ingredients, bio-based products, as well as other industrial uses. And this is an area that we see really huge potential to grow markets for corn and work to reduce that amount of corn that we maybe carry over from year to year. So when we look at innovation, as it relates to these areas, we really work at the intersection of research, of industry, and of policy, as well as other areas, to enhance demand and ultimately add value to that crop. Next slide. So as this shows, when we talk about adding value to corn, innovation has absolutely been the driver for adding value. Corn as its components is really worth more than whole corn itself. So processing corn, really creates value from everything we're able to get out of that single bushel or that single kernel. And as that demand graph illustrated, ethanol is really a prime example of a value-added product, for the fact that we've been able to take a feed grain and process it into a fuel source that is now our largest area of demand. And not only that, but we're able to have the added benefit that we're able to take this byproduct from that process called distiller's grain, and then also market that as another high-value feed source for livestock. Next slide. As I mentioned, that other processing wedge on that uses graph was currently a very small proportion of use, but this has huge potential to be impacted by innovation. This graphic that's up on the screen is from the National Corn Growers Association, and it shows, the many uses of corn, including, some of the 4,000 consumer products that are already utilizing corn components as ingredients. And we're working with institutions like the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, as well as our counterparts across the corn sector to really support, looking at continued development of new corn-based products and uses. Ideally, we'd like to find innovative ways to use every bushel of corn in state and then export that in the form of value-added products, like ethanol, like meat, or some of these bio-based products as well. And in doing so, we really see keeping value in Nebraska and also keeping or increasing, jobs related to these industries in our state and in our rural communities. So go to the next slide. So finally, kind of that last area of our vision statement around ensuring sustainability. When we look at sustainability, we're looking at it in a number of ways. One, of course, is economic sustainability, and we think about that, not only as adding value or creating these markets for corn, but also increasing efficiency and reducing costs associated with corn production. So outside of our new use research, we're looking at things, our research interests, I guess, really focus on production efficiency and working towards maintaining or increasing these yields while using fewer natural resources and inputs to do so. So that includes things like, research into sensors or other tools to better guide our management decisions, matching our hybrids and the genetics to better work with the environments they're planted in, as well as, supporting things like the Nebraska On-Farm Research Network, which really empowers growers to test practices or test, different technologies on their farm that they find innovative and then share those findings with their peers as well. If you go to the next slide. So, innovation in crop production from, the genetics to the management have really played this key role in demonstrating to society, to our policymakers, to the food chain, really that continuous improvement that we've seen as an industry. So continuing to innovate within the corn industry is, really becoming increasingly more important in order to help protect that, farmer social license and our freedom to operate, but also to take advantage of maybe some of those emerging market opportunities that might be linked to things like environmental sustainability. If you go to my last slide. So that's just kind of a 30,000-foot view maybe of the Nebraska Corn Board, and hopefully it's clear that innovation really plays a huge role across all facets of the work that we're involved with. And I guess if you want to learn more after today, I would really encourage you to check us out on kind of any of our social media channels there at the bottom, and I can also put my contact information in the chat box as well. And so I will turn it back over to Sarah.
Thanks, Ben. Next up, we are going to hear from Becky Boat, and she's going to talk to us about the Nebraska Rural Poll.
Thank you, Sarah. Yeah, today I'm going to share briefly about the Rural Poll and share some of the data that we have looked at that will hopefully provide you a look at the rural landscape and also show you some of the data that are available. I'm going to move quickly through most of these slides, so because there are quite a few, but again, I just wanted to share with you a little bit about what is available. The Rural Poll is an annual mail survey that was started in 1996, and it was started to really be able to look at the pulse of rural Nebraska and how they're feeling and doing out there. Each year, 7,000 households are sampled. The next slide, really the map here shows first of all, it shows the 5 multi-county regions that our data are prepared by, so that all of our reports do show that data by those regions, but it also shows you a little bit better the sample that we have. We basically survey the non-metropolitan counties, but there are a few exceptions. So those darker yellow shaded counties are technically metropolitan counties or part of metropolitan areas, but we still include those in our sample, especially the Grand Island one, because that makes up such a big part of our sample that to continue to look at the trends, we keep those in there. So basically we survey all the counties except those shaded in green that are part of the Lincoln and Omaha area. In the next slide, every year about half of our survey consists of core questions that are asked every year, and that allows us to track the trends and changes over time. And those include questions about community and as well as well-being. And so the next slides are going to show a little bit of some of those examples of that community trend data. This first one looks at how rural Nebraskans are viewing the change occurring in their community. In this one, we see that overall the views about the change has been positive. Most people, in most of the years, more people believe that their community has changed for the better than has changed for the worse. But we also see that red line is no change. So we do see that overall the majority do see no change each year. The next slide looks at how they view their community change in the future, how they believe their community will be 10 years from now. And again, we are seeing a little bit upward movement of people believing that their community will be a better place to live 10 years from now. That has increased. We've only asked this question in the past 9 years. That's why there's a few less data points in this. And similar to that last slide, we're seeing that a majority of people do feel that the community is going to stay about the same. The next slide shows some examples of the breakdowns that we do with our data. Like I mentioned before, we have region. We also look at community size and various demographic variables. So this slide shows the satisfaction with cost of housing by community size. And it shows that people living in the larger communities are more likely to be dissatisfied with the cost of housing in their community. In the next slide, we see a breakdown by age in the percentage of people who agree with the statement that they have goals for their community. Almost half of the people aged 19 to 29 agree that they have goals for their community, which I believe is a positive sign for communities. Young people are looking and caring about the future of their communities. Next slide. In addition to those core questions, we also ask new questions every year, and those topics are solicited by state and community leaders and organizations such as those that are represented on the panel today. In 2018, we asked some questions about internet services, some of which had been asked before in 2016. So this slide shows the percentage of people that access the internet with their cell phone. And it's important to note this is not their only way of accessing the internet, it's just how many people access the internet with their cell phone in addition to other ways. But we did see that increase from 70% in 2016 to 77% in 2018, which is the most current we have. The next slide, we look at subscription to internet service at home, and we look at this by community size, and we see that those living in the smallest communities are less likely to subscribe to that internet service at home as compared to the larger communities. The next slide looks specifically at what types of internet services they're having. We see the majority are reporting having DSL or cable service. Only 9% of that time had fiber, and almost a third are relying on satellite or fixed wireless service. The next slide shows some of the limitations we had asked about if their service is limiting their ability to do various tasks. And we found overall that not many reported significant limitations, but we did find that in certain populations, such as residents of the smaller communities, as well as people living in both the Northeast and the Southeast regions. And the next slide illustrates one of those differences by community size. So we do see that about 20% of the people living in or near the smallest communities report having a significant limitation in their ability to stream online video content, and it's less than 10% in the largest communities there. The next slide shows when we asked about the benefits that they receive from having the internet service, and one of that was the impact on farm efficiency and profitability. When we look at that by community size, again, we're seeing that the people living in the smaller communities are more likely to see that impact. And it goes along with what Jay showed earlier, that a lot of the farm operations out there are using the internet, and they're seeing and reporting some significant benefits from that as well. And finally, on the next slide, we're going to look at some perceptions of ag that we asked about in 2017 as well as 2010. And that next slide shows that people are reporting economic dependence on ag. First of all, we see a little difference between 2010 and 2017. And secondly, we see that over half are reporting that they're very much economically dependent on ag, and that's for their household. The next slide asked about how their community and how dependent their community is on ag. And we see higher levels of dependence at the community level, where just over 8 in 10 people report that their community is very much economically dependent on ag. And the next slide looks a little bit deeper into that by community size. And we see that people living in those smaller communities are more likely to report that their community is very much economically dependent on ag. And finally, in the next slide, we also asked about the perception of the downturn in ag that was occurring in 2018. And at that time, many, about 42% there, were viewing it, that downturn at that time, as about the same as others in the past. And only 20% thought it was worse than ones in the past. So that was just kind of a quick look at some of the data that we do have available. We have a lot more. All of our reports can be found online. We have an index by topic as well as by year. So if you have a specific topic that you are wondering if we have data on, you can search by that or by the particular year. And the final slide just shows our team's contact information. So if you have any questions about the data or what we have available, or if you would like to suggest topics for us to consider including in future polls, any one of us can be contacted. Thank you.
Thank you, Becky. Now we are going to hear from Nate Bloom, who is with the Nebraska Grain Sorghum Board.
Hey, sorry about that, technical difficulties. Welcome, everybody. I'm glad you're spending some time with us today to learn about opportunities and innovation in agriculture. If you are a young person in particular looking for a really profitable career, agriculture in Nebraska definitely is the way to go if we rethink how we are marketing our products. Before we go too far here, I hope the glare isn't bothering anybody. It's sorry, it's just part of the life of bald guy. So we can go on to the next slide here and go ahead and get started. So how we're innovating in Nebraska sorghum, and we just announced this project, the Catalyst project, is we're rethinking how we market our products. And the reason I've got this slide up here, this is back from November. These are just basis maps. You may be familiar with them, or you may not be familiar with them. But the short story is red is bad. That means negative basis. And if you look at soybean, corn, and sorghum basis on this day, the 6th of November last year, you'll see that there's a lot of blue in states around us, and there's not as much blue in our state. And we feel like a big part of the reason for that is the way the commodity marketing model works. And so we're looking to augment it. So you can go ahead and go to the next slide. So our long-term strategy here is to co-locate value-added, consumer-ready product production here in the state for sorghum for a variety of different projects. And you can see there's just some suggestions in a paper I had written for my board here. And what we're trying to do is supplement the commodity model. So we want to go ahead and continue. We need those export markets. We need that commodity model to work. But at the same time, we need to be more intentional about what we grow. So if you've got a local, say, bioplastics facility that needs a certain crop grown in a certain way, as a producer, you hopefully can get that product under contract before you ever plant the first seed. And then you've not only increased your farm revenue, but you're also helping to create jobs in rural communities. And so this is a model that we're kind of piloting here in Nebraska with Nebraska sorghum. We're eager to see where it goes and what kind of success we're going to have with it. But we're hoping that if it is successful, it can become a template for other commodity crops as well. The potential for sorghum is very, very high in high value, high premium consumer markets. Whether you agree with it or not, the attributes that these consumers want are things like non-GMO, gluten-free, high in antioxidants, low in sugars, and promote wildlife, water, and soil conservation. And those are all attributes that sorghum has. So just this morning, talking about innovation, we announced, I mentioned it earlier, the Catalyst program. I just saw the clip. Actually, it aired on Pure Nebraska, and I didn't get to watch it live. But what we're doing is we're partnering with the Engler Agribusiness Entrepreneurship Program at the University of Nebraska, the Food for Health Center, yes, thank you, the Food for Health Center, the Combine, which was mentioned earlier, and the University of Nebraska Foundation. And we're running this as a product development competition. So here in the fall, we'll take teams, not just of students at the university, but of all ages and from across the state and tied to industry and everything else. And we're going to give them the tools and the resources and the encouragement and empowerment that they need to create new value-added products using sorghum that would then be targeted at those larger high-value, high-premium consumer markets. But we don't just want prototypes. What we want at the end of the day in January is we're going to sit these teams down in a room with economic developers and investors from across the state, and they're going to pitch their product to those developers and investors. And we want those developers and investors then to basically fight over them and say, we feel like you could have this this facility located in our community, and here are the resources we can offer you. And you know, again, for us, what it's really all about is obviously, you know, we believe in sorghum, but we also believe in the vitality, the need for a vitality and increased robustness in rural communities, not just in Nebraska. But this is an important issue in agriculture in general. And I said earlier, you know, if you're a young person and you're looking for opportunities in ag and you really want to be profitable and successful, these are the kind of opportunities that I'm talking about. You know, you don't have to get behind the wheel of a tractor or a combine to leverage the primary economic driver of the state, which is agriculture. By innovating and creating new products that are consumer ready, we can actually capture value here in Nebraska and reverse that basis map that you saw earlier with all the red and bring some of that blue into Nebraska. So that's one of the things that we're working on. I put up our website and our email address earlier in the chat box. So if you've got anything you'd like to get in touch with us directly about, you're welcome to do that. I would also suggest if you want to learn more about Nebraska sorghum, you visit our website. We've got our reports and newsletters and things like that on there. And if you subscribe, we'll sure get you on the list and keep you in the loop as we do new things. Thank you.
Thank you, Nate. Next up, we are going to hear from Brian Williams, who is the economist with Nebraska Public Power District. Brian. Brian, you're still on mute.
All right, I'm just talking to myself here, but that's okay. Anyway, a little bit about Nebraska Public Power District, who we are, what we do. I'm sure most of you are probably aware of us. We supply electricity to a good chunk of rural Nebraska, either directly or indirectly. We serve all or part of 86 out of Nebraska's 93 counties, so we have a pretty large presence. In terms of our service area, the estimated population is just over 600,000 people. We have 50 wholesale communities, so communities around the state that we sell electricity directly to. We also sell to 25 rural public power districts and cooperatives, and then 80 retail communities where we're selling directly to customers within those communities. And that makes up about 91,000 customers. So kind of a little background on who we are and kind of our service area. In terms of ag innovation and what NPPD is doing, the big thing that comes to mind is we are working with some private industry companies on improving connectivity throughout the state through what's called the Internet of Things. What this does is it helps to facilitate and transmit data from our farm equipment, irrigation equipment, other ag, drones, that sort of thing. And it helps to facilitate precision ag. So when I mentioned the Internet of Things, so it's not actually the broadband that you're thinking that you're streaming this through. It's a little bit slower type of internet, and it's used more, Jay mentioned precision ag and the data that's being collected earlier. This Internet of Things helps to transmit that data so that you can get your hands on it, so producers can get their hands on it and actually use it. So it makes all of this precision ag a lot more useful. We also fund and have mobile STEM labs where we help to educate Nebraska's youth on science, technology, engineering, mathematics, which hopefully at the end of the day will help to facilitate additional innovation. We also help to fund a program called Illuminate Nebraska. It's another, kind of like our STEM labs, it's another educational program that we put out there that we help to facilitate as a company to, again, educate youngsters across the state, and then also helps to facilitate innovation. in terms of what I do, a little bit about myself, I'm an economist in the economic development department. So what we do as a department is we try to grow business across the state, whether it's through business retention and expansion efforts within a community and helping those communities to keep business and grow business that's already there, or we also help to try to recruit business to the state. So in my mind, I think Nate and Boone both mentioned this. We want to try to keep our ag products in the state. And so what we do as an economic development department is we try to bring business in that can help to transform that ag product or the raw commodities and be able to ship them out. Rather than shipping out corn, we're shipping out ethanol. Rather than shipping out soybeans, we're shipping out soybean meal or biodiesel. So in my mind, to improve that basis, that's really what we need to do as a state, is try to, rather than shipping out the grain, we want to try to keep the grain here, transform it, and then ship out that transformed product. So that's kind of a very broad, brief overview of kind of NPPD, what we do in terms of trying to help with innovation and trying to bring innovation into the state.
Terrific. Thank you, Brian. So now we're going to jump into our moderated portion or moderated question panel with all of our speakers. And so I will put forth a question, and then at any point, if any one of you want to jump in with your expertise and then create dialogue about some of these conversations. So first up, what are some new ways to bring value to commodities grown in Nebraska?
Well, I'll jump in there if I can, but I don't know if my video is working or not, so I apologize. But this is Nate with the Sorghum board, if you can't see me. Just like we talked about. Oh, here we go. There, we've got video. Just like a lot of us have talked about this morning, and Brian just so well said as well, keeping the raw product in Nebraska and shipping out consumer-ready goods, I think, is how we really move the needle in Nebraska. And frankly, it makes a lot of sense to do that from our state, by the way. So if you're a manufacturer, you decrease your supply line by locating your processing proximate to the production. And then at the same time in Nebraska, we're approximately 2 to 2.5 days from anywhere else in the continental U.S. by truck. So logistically, it makes a lot of sense. The challenge I think you may run into, this is a challenge for everybody right now, is labor force, workforce, housing, and all the things that go around with that. But those are challenges that I think we can't be shy about, and we can't let those impede this value-added model.
So I can add to that a little bit. I think I agree everything with what Nate said. While maybe not new, I think livestock diversification and expansion is helping drive, some new kind of valuable innovation to corn and other commodities. Nebraska, we're really known as the beef state. And so, distillers' grains from ethanol production has really been proven to be a valuable component of the beef and ruminant animal diet. Now as we're seeing more expansion into things like pork production and especially, poultry production with the addition of Costco and Fremont, I think we're seeing, the ethanol and feed industries really diversify their product lines more through kind of further fractionation or further separation of corn products and being able to kind of create this next generation feed sources that are better optimized for monogastric livestock diets like hogs, like chickens, and even now we're seeing aquaculture. So there's companies like White Dog Labs, and they're actually partnering with the ethanol plant in Sutherland, Nebraska, as well as a group called Evonik, and they're partnering with Cargill up in Blair. And they're both producing these kind of single cell proteins produced by fermentation of corn to be used really as a sustainable alternative to harvesting fish meal. So using that for aquaculture feed. And, we're actually kind of seeing aquaculture and farmed fish popping up across the Midwest as well as in Nebraska. As we see it, with Nebraska being the third largest corn producing state, the second largest ethanol producer, and then kind of among the top producers of livestock, of cattle, of hogs, of poultry, things like that. We like to say that in Nebraska, we have this golden triangle of corn, livestock, ethanol, because we feel that there's, no state really better situated to take advantage of some of these, kind of symbiotic and value-added relationships between industries, which is a huge economic driver for our state. And as we talk about things like the bioplastic industry kind of maybe more involving here, that just really adds another layer to I think that concept and that value-added component of that. I guess as we look at, especially the ethanol industry, here in Nebraska, we have 25 ethanol plants across the state. And our vision is really to see how these plants might evolve from more than just, an ethanol plant, but really be seen as a kind of biorefinery, really capable of producing, multiple value products. And we're already kind of starting to see that, with White Dog Labs or with Evonik. Places up in Blair at Cargill, their campus is really all about, how can we bring those industries closer to that feedstock, like Nate was mentioning, being able to use those co-products and make multiple value-added products from that. Another example, ADM in Columbus at their ethanol plant, they actually have a company called Prairie Catalytic, which is co-located on that site. They're making ethyl acetate, which is just another organic compound. It's used in products like artificial sweeteners, paints, and things like that. And that's coming from that feedstock from their ethanol corn mill. And so that's kind of where we're seeing, value coming from being able to expand again that demand for corn in state and then export those really high value products to be used all over the world.
I think Boone brought up a good point. You mentioned the ethanol, and I think that's something that's probably worth mentioning too, or expanding on, is supporting those industries that consume our products. Whether it's ethanol and trying to find, innovating on uses for that ethanol that we can, transform the corn to the ethanol, and then transform the ethanol to something else and then ship that product out, and just adding additional value, increasing that, health of those other industries that are already transforming our products. Costco's another one that comes to mind, and the meat and bringing in those livestock. And I think you guys already mentioned that, but, ways that we can improve the health of those industries that are consuming our ag products as well can help to add value to our ag products.
Excellent. We will jump into our next question now. What are the biggest challenges in ag that could be addressed through innovation?
Well, I guess I'll take a crack at this one. Jay Rimpey with Farm Bureau again. A couple things come to mind, and I think all of them are first set revolve around, excuse me, what the conversation we we're just having about new products. How do you add value? How do you look for those opportunities? And I think we in Nebraska, we need to continually look outside our borders to look for different opportunities, new opportunities where we may be able to capture some value. And one example, I know the livestock industry is watching very keenly with the alternative proteins markets and what happens there. And because we're obviously an important livestock state, but we also, there's some opportunities there within Western Nebraska raises peas and beans and the like. There might be some opportunities there within those alternative protein markets for Nebraska agriculture. So I think innovation around helping us as producers find and look for those potential markets. I think the other thing that as an economist that it seems to me that there's a lot of effort and work being put into the production side of agriculture, and a lot of work, but maybe not quite as much being put into the value added and processing and that. And there seems to be, I think some of the things that farmers and ranchers are going to need in the future is help around the marketing, finding new marketing channels, the financial planning, business development. How do I grow my business? How do I develop the plans for them? And to me, that's going to be one of the bigger challenges, because the world, as we've seen in the last 2 or 3 months, can change so rapidly that we're going to need some innovation and some help around how do we manage through those kinds of times and those kind of volatility. And I think that would be important. And I think there's some technology that can be brought to that to help in that regard. And so that's an area where I think there's some opportunities that in some of the challenges that we face.
I guess one other thing maybe I'd add, just since I kind of work in the area of stewardship, I'd say that one of the biggest challenges that can be addressed in ag is just sustainability. And I really just say that because, that's really what ag addresses every day. When it comes down to it, I think the most basic function of agriculture is, sustaining life through the production of food, but we also have the added benefits of being able to make, fuel, fiber, all of these different products. But being able to do that does require us to manage our resources that we have and to make sure that ag can continue to provide these things in the future. And that challenge really comes now as we look at factors like, population growth and the fact that these resources are shared by many different users. But that being said, innovation, I think, is a continuous process, and it's no coincidence that farmers and the ag industry are working to continually improve how we produce our products. For corn farmers, that starts with the seed, so innovations in breeding, to production, the innovations in practices and precision ag and things like that, to innovative markets that incentivize, may provide some cost share for practices that further protect and improve our resources, while sustaining our economic production as well. So it's maybe kind of a simple answer to a complex question, but I really think ag sustainability is something that is being addressed with innovation now, and that's going to continue in the future.
Well said. There's another fundamental issue facing agriculture, and it's not new. It has been for a while, and it's the disconnect between the ag producers and their urban customers. I think the statistic is that approximately 2% of the population is tied into direct production agriculture. That means there's 98% of the people that aren't. They may be in agribusiness or ag adjacent businesses, but they're not in production agriculture. And we see no shortage of groups that like to tell us on our farms how we ought to be doing our business, and telling consumers information that is just absolutely false. We've got to find a better way to decrease that enmity between urban and rural in this country. With everything going on right now, I mean, there's enough chaos going on in the world. We don't need people to not trust where their food is coming from and understand that the farmers are really the best stewards of their land and resources. They have to be. It's interesting. We need to do better engaging with consumers. Or the analogy I use is that we do a really good job in agriculture of preaching to the choir, but we completely neglect the congregation. And when you think about the congregation are the ones that are filling up that offering plate every Sunday, we've got to do a better job of talking to them. One thing that we're doing here in Nebraska this year is the Sorghum board has partnered with a software company called Hyxus, Hyxus. And Hyxus is a traceability application. And some of these applications are out there already, but what we're trying to do with them, we're partnering with 2 of our producers this year who are piloting this, is we're trying to find a way to track the pertinent data that consumers and end users need to see, and making that simple entry in an app so that it can be done on the fly. And then on the back end, and here's where that connecting with consumers comes in. On the back end, we're going to be piloting a QR code system. So, maybe your product goes to the grocery store in Los Angeles or New York City or wherever, and the consumer can scan a QR code and see the key aspects of traceability that they need to see, and maybe even a picture of the farm so they can see where it comes from. And I believe that by connecting consumers directly with facts in that way, assuming they can trust those facts, that it removes the space in which those that would seek to do agriculture harm can spread mistruths because they have direct access to it. So this is, like I said, it's something we're piloting right now with Hixus. We're going to be really interested to see how this works. But I think that we need to do a better job of not only telling our story, but controlling our story and engaging with those consumers.
So to tie into that, want to jump into the topic of what other opportunities could emerge through the advancement of traceability technology.
Well, just like I said, I mean, you're looking at high premium markets, for example. You know, if I'm a consumer and I've got disposable income and I, want to buy the very best, that QR code, being able to know the story of my food gives me a sense of security, and people pay more for a sense of security. So I think that if this is something that's successful in Nebraska sorghum, it certainly could be done in other crops as well. And, again, really producing intentional products with the consumer in mind that can increase those revenues on the farm.
Yeah, let me take that a little different direction, because I agree wholeheartedly with what Nate said in terms of the traceability and increasing revenue on the farm. One of the things that I've been thinking about and watching a little bit too is the blockchain technology and what that might mean in the way of transaction costs for farmers and ranchers and local elevators in the state of Nebraska, because presumably using blockchain technology, we might be able to bypass a lot of middlemen in terms of exporting grains or exporting our products overseas, where you could use the blockchain to track that transaction and keep a record of it and cut out a lot of the cost. And so I think there might be some opportunities there in regards to us taking our products to new and different markets and doing it more efficiently and with less cost, which should help and benefit both consumers on the end, but also producers and local elevators here in Nebraska. So I think there's some opportunities with the traceability and the blockchain technology to do some of those kinds of things.
I guess I'd agree with both Nate and Jay, and maybe just looking at it from one other angle, outside of just kind of the value added component and kind of how do we keep value that way. I think additionally there's another challenge, that can maybe be addressed with traceability, and that's when it comes to, safety and kind of a regulatory standpoint. There have been instances where maybe, genetically modified corn is grown in the US, but it's maybe not approved for, international markets. If that grain gets into those markets, that can really hurt relationships with our trade partners. It can cause supply chain disruptions. And so I think being able to prevent those instances like that is very valuable and something that can be addressed through that kind of traceability, as well as identity preservation of our crops and other commodities.
Then moving on to our next question, what can be done to address the ecological sustainability of agriculture?
All right, I'll jump in here, and I certainly don't want to jump on or step on any other commodities' toes. I will say that we work really well with the other commodity groups, and they work well with us here in Nebraska. Our philosophy is that our growers aren't just growing one crop, and nor should they. So if we're going to work for them, to work for the growers most effectively, we need to be working together. And I think we do a good job of that in Nebraska. Other states, not so much. So that's good. But when you talk about ecological sustainability, the one thing that really needs to happen is more crop diversification, more rotations. A lot of parts of the state are doing just corn and soybeans. That's not as good as we should have for things like soil health and breaking disease and pest cycles and things like that. We encourage folks to include sorghum in their rotation for the benefits that we just talked about, the soil health in particular. But But, as far as ecological sustainability, I'll say what I said before, which is that I grew up on the farm. I know this to be true. Farmers are the best conservationists in the world. Their very livelihood and their family legacies depend on them taking care of their land and their resources. But that doesn't mean we can't do a better job.
Just to expand on what Nate said, you're seeing a lot of, I think with the growth of precision ag and a lot of the research that's going into that, another thing that comes to mind is cover crops that are being used, to improve that soil health, improve, the diversity of the crops that are grown on that land. Precision ag is helping our producers to grow more with less inputs, or grow the same with less inputs. One thing that really comes to mind for me is before I grew up in Nebraska, but I spent 6 years on the faculty down at Mississippi State, and I had the university there, and I had a colleague there that would challenge producers to let him basically manage the irrigation of one of their fields, and through soil moisture tests and monitors, he would basically guarantee them that he could get the same yield with half the water. And I didn't believe it, but there were a handful of producers in some of the meetings that I've been at that said, we took the chance, let him do it, and sure enough, he was able to get the same yields with half the water. So there's a lot of innovation going out there. A lot of it comes back to some of the precision ag, having that data, having that information to drive decisions.
So I may just add to kind of what Brian said. I think it's a good segue for this, but I think, like he mentioned with precision ag and just being able to kind of continually improve and, improve yields with using fewer resources. I think beyond just throwing, new technology and tools at producers, I think one way is just through innovative ways of teaching and maybe changing mindsets of the ag producers. I think really one great example of that is the UNL TAPS program. It stands for Testing Ag Performance Solutions. The Corn Board, the Sorghum Board are all involved in that. I know Jay is very familiar with the TAPS program. But what that is, it's really this farm management competition in which participants, they make all the management and marketing decisions across their field plots at UNL's West Central Research and Extension Center. And these decisions include things like the hybrid choice, timing and amount of fertilizer and irrigation, as well as the grain marketing decisions. And so after harvest, the competitors are able to anonymously kind of compare how they did against their peers in terms of their decisions and how those decisions really impacted the final result of their crop. And so first prize goes to most profitable, followed by the highest input use efficiency, and then looking at highest yield. So it really kind of sets up challengers, or it's set up to really challenge producers' mindsets on the way they make those decisions through kind of a low risk peer-to-peer learning environment. But from that sustainability standpoint, if producer A sees that they're using high levels of water and nitrogen compared to others, but they didn't really see any difference in yield, and then also had kind of the lower profit, that might motivate them to learn more from those other producers about what management practices and technologies or even marketing strategies that they're using. And that can really demonstrate that, high profit and resource use efficiency aren't mutually exclusive. And it really helps them further explore what they could do differently on their operation. It really kind of capitalizes on that idea that, farmers kind of always want to know what their neighbors are doing on their farm.
To jump in on that too, I think the opportunity to challenge producers and how they think is very important. And I'll give a little plug here for both Boone and I, being graduates of the Nebraska LEAD program, which, if you're not familiar, is, I think, the premier ag leadership development program in the country. Terry Haney does a great job over there. I see a few LEAD alums also in the attendee list. But finding ways to encourage producers not just to think outside the box, but to be productive leaders in agriculture is important. And just while I'm talking about leadership development, I sent a message to the group my son Liam Bloom is on the call, and I'm really excited that he jumped in. Liam just graduated from Lincoln Southeast High School and is going to be going to Northeast Community College in the fall to study agronomy. But kids like Liam, you know, finding ways to engage them and teach them how to lead and to think for themselves, not telling them what to think, but teaching them to think for themselves is going to be critical. We just can't do enough of that in agriculture.
Now that we are at 11, I think we'll go ahead and dive into the questions that are coming through. We've gotten quite a few so far from our audience. Want to make sure we get to those. So Josh, if you want to start us out with one of our questions.
Yeah, so the kind of the first question that came in was just kind of the challenges to agricultural innovation, I think specific to Nebraska or nationally. And I think the question is in the realm of kind of like the mechanics, like what have you seen in terms of access to capital maybe being a challenge, or, you know, kind of just how to get certain new innovations, new ideas off the ground?
Yeah, you touched on one that first came to my mind anyway, was the access to capital in Nebraska. And for whatever reason, we have a lot of difficulty of connecting the capital that might be available to startup companies in Nebraska. And I'm aware of a startup company in the middle of the Sandhills that was just looking for $25,000, and they had trouble. They went to their local banker. The local banker was because of some of the regulatory requirements, didn't feel like they could offer the financing for that. And I'm aware, working with our farmers and ranchers and others across the state, that there is some capital available that if we could figure out a way to match up that capital with the startups and the innovators and others, I think we would have a pretty good system going here. So I think that's one of the bigger challenges that we face right now in not only agriculture, but rural Nebraska in general.
Sorry. Yeah, were there any other thoughts on that? Sorry, I didn't have my video on and I'm a little flustered. All right. So I guess the other question that came up, and we addressed it a little bit, but I wanted to give it its specific due, is agriculture innovation for managing water and how this is communicated to consumers. So just like innovations that you have seen in terms of water management, I know that was, you know, someone spoke to that a little bit, but anything that you kind of see in the offing there, or a specific priority, funding priority, or whatever that your organizations have seen or see an opportunity with in terms of innovation in that space.
Yeah, I'll jump in real quick, and I'm sure Boone might be able to offer some too. He mentioned the TAPS project, which that's originally how that, if I recall correctly, how that kind of got started. It was driven around the need to come up with new technologies related to water conservation and more efficient use of the water. There is a lot happening in that arena, and it's being driven largely because of the drought in 2012, but some of the water policy issues that we have in the state of Nebraska. But it's hard to keep track and touch what farmers are adopting, but a lot of them are using some technologies now. Obviously, variable rate application, that some of them have evapotranspiration monitors, low pressure systems, and soil moisture probes, the whole gamut. They are looking. And a lot of them now have a dashboard that they check, and they'll look at the soil water capacity level, or where they're at and where they need to add water. And so they are using those kind of technologies and running their center pivot systems and their irrigation systems from cell phones with keeping track of that. So there's a host of things happening out there. I think frankly, it's one of the things that with the University of Nebraska and the Water for Food and all the things that are happening, that Nebraska is definitely a leader in. And a lot of states and countries, for that matter, are following or watching us as we experiment and learn new things.
I guess kind of related to that question, just is also, in terms of successful initiatives, are those typically led by producers, and then it, or organization led, and then it kind of follows down to producers? I mean, like what is at least in your experience, the best way for those kind of innovations to be disseminated by the people who could use them most? I think it would be a follow-up question I would have.
Mm-hmm. A little bit of everything, all of the above, I guess. A lot of it is being driven by producers. They're an amazing, innovative, and resourceful people on the ground, and you have to be to manage all the different variances or variabilities that they have to manage. And so a lot of it's coming from producers, but there's a lot of partners involved. The commodity boards have invested dollars. The University of Nebraska has spent a lot of time on research. The local natural resources districts, which manage our groundwater, are involved. So there's a lot of cooperators and partners in this. And what we've found is by working together, but the producers are more apt to listen and learn from each other. So we're really trying, and that TAPS project is a great example that Boone mentioned. We're really trying to work on the peer-to-peer, showing how these technologies work on the ground and how they work for different producers. And we find that's probably the best way to disseminate this information.
And I guess I would just agree with what Jay said. I think if something can be led by producers first and then kind of amplified through the university or other partners, I think that has the most chances of success if it can be kind of farmer led and really learn from peers. One other, I think, concept that we're also starting to explore now as it relates to maybe, water use or water efficiency, as well as just resource efficiency, is kind of this idea of ecosystem service markets. That's the idea where farmers are voluntarily adjusting production, systems or adopting practices that maybe, use, less water, improve water quality, maybe look at carbon sequestration, reducing greenhouse gases, things like that. And if those kind of changes can be quantified and then, could possibly be monetized and sold as credits to buyers such as, companies or municipalities who want to offset their environmental or supply chain impacts in some way. And, this isn't necessarily a new idea, but I think it is something that is gaining traction and support from many players, across the supply chain and across society. And I guess we kind of see that as an opportunity to help offset some of those costs and risks that producers might face, when they're making changes to their production systems or adopting these practices and technologies, that kind of lead to improved environmental sustainability, like water use.
No, that's great. Thank you. Then there was a specific question about advanced biofuels for avionics and production of other crops that will, kind of contribute to EV. So I was just curious, if that's kind of in the conversation there, and then how would an initiative like that, what's the interest level there, and then also how does that interest kind of move through the system as well? So if anyone could speak to that, that'd be great.
Well, speaking from sorghum, for sorghum, I should say, when it comes to biofuels in Nebraska, it's a little bit of a sore subject. Sorghum is as good as corn in regard to making ethanol, for example, but we don't use it anywhere in Nebraska in our ethanol plants. Meanwhile, in just south of us in Kansas, they use a lot of sorghum in their ethanol. That's definitely a commodity market, but it's a base market that would be very, very helpful for our growers. That's something that we're trying to work on with ethanol folks to include that. And in fact, there's technologies now. In fact, there's a plant in Kansas that commingles their corn and sorghum, and what they do is they dump it in the same pit at the same time, and they've got lasers that can tell them how much of each crop is in there and automatically adjust the enzymes that they need. That's definitely something we can do in Nebraska. In fact, National Sorghum has said if we get an ethanol plant that wants to trial that technology, that they'll even help pay for it. But our grain growers definitely need access to the ethanol market again. So that doesn't directly answer your question, but I do think there's a lot of potentials, like you said, biofuels and things like that for avionics and others. But we've got to make sure that sorghum has a seat at the table, because I'm not going to tell people to grow sorghum if they don't have somewhere to sell it.
I guess from the corn side, I think we're definitely following, advanced biofuels and kind of what that means for ethanol. I'd say probably right now our priority has really just been focused on, ethanol use, among, kind of our just consumer and transport fleet really. E10 is pretty much the standard. The 10% ethanol blend has been pretty standard, and last year we have seen, kind of approval of 15%, and we're always looking at how can we increase those higher ethanol blends for consumers, really capitalize on kind of that high octane, cleaner burning, as well as a more cost-effective fuel source. So I think that's really where our priority has been on that area. But I think those advanced biofuels for other uses is something that we definitely track and is definitely an opportunity, for the future.
Great. So, I mean, we've had a couple of questions that have come in, whether, it's a faculty member at UNO who has within the aviation space, or kind of a plant scientist at UNL. But if you are a researcher, and like, what's the best way to engage with your organizations, or if you're an entrepreneur and you have an idea, what does that engagement look like? I mean, how do you kind of go about working with the players within the ecosystem, whether that's forming, like commercial partnerships potentially, or doing some research or something like that? So if, NPPD could speak to that, or, there are specific questions, just in terms of, running the gamut of the different research interests that we have on the call, how does that look? What does that look like? How could someone work with you?
Before Brian jumps in on this for NPP, I just want to tell everybody, I like ideas, I like collaboration, and I'm accessible all the time. And I put up my email earlier. My personal cell phone is 402-802-1850. I like ideas. Contact me directly. The only time we fail is when we don't try. And sometimes we can't evaluate an idea until we've got a little bit down the road and giving it a shot. So that's speaking for us.
I guess I'd agree with Nate. I guess the best way to interact with us is just call or contact us in some way. Contact me. Since I kind of manage our research side, we work very closely with UNL in terms of we put out an annual call for proposals every year for research projects. We do kind of have a period that we look at, but we do consider proposals all year long. So if there is ideas, or you just want to kind of pick our brains about ideas for research or for other things, the best way is just to connect with us. Email me, call our office, and we're happy to always listen to ideas.
From our perspective, we don't do a lot of like funding of research and that sort of thing, but we definitely can help to make connections, and help define those collaborations. And then if there's an idea that's ready to go, we can help to try to find a site to set up shop and get things going from that side of things.
That's great, thanks. Then there was a question too about kind of the potential for drones also in agriculture, or I guess in rural environments as well. So that was a specific question that came in as well. So if someone could speak to that, that'd be great.
I can take a shot at it. I think drones is a tool that probably hasn't met its full potential yet. I think when we started seeing drones first in ag, they were kind of more seen as a novelty, if anything. But now we have definitely seen better applications of them for doing aerial imagery, having sensors on drones that can help us, make those management decisions for crops. And I think more and more we're also seeing companies looking at how do we, go beyond just kind of the imagery and the data collection using drones, but actually use them to do, field work, like, applying, herbicides or things like that, using them to be very targeted in application for these things. I know there are several companies kind of looking at how do we do that, and you can watch videos online of kind of swarms of drones that are going across fields and doing work like that. So I think, again, it's something that maybe we're not seeing widespread yet, but I think that is definitely something that we're coming, and has a lot of potential, at least, to really further expand the utility of drones in ag.
And a plug for the University of Nebraska here in Lincoln. They have a world-class drone program, development program that these students are working on. So if you don't know about that, I want to say it's housed in the south end zone of the stadium, as a matter of fact. But an excellent facility to go visit if you're a young person or just somebody who wants to learn more about what you can do with drones. Get in touch with those folks, and you'll be amazed.
I was just going to make a note of the use of drones, not only in the crop sector, but in the livestock sector as well, too, because I know there are ranchers that are using drones to check their livestock, to fly out and find their herd. And I understand that they could be equipped with some technologies to, try to measure animal health, too, as well when the animal's out there, with the low-cost way of doing that. So there are some innovative ways that drones are being used in the livestock sector as well. Oh, and I guess one other thing I was going to add, Josh, just in response to your question about how our organizations can help. One of the things that we don't have a lot of resources financially that we can help with people, but one of the things that we found some success is somebody has an idea and wants a farmer to maybe try it out, or wants to talk to some farmers and ranchers to bounce some ideas off of them. We're able to connect people with some farmers and ranchers on the ground where they can test some ideas or run some thoughts and things by them to get some real feedback on whether might be a valuable tool or a potential use for them. So we certainly offer that to anybody that has an interest.
Great. Yeah, thank you. And then Becky, I guess that was a question there too. I'm sorry, I jumped the gun, but in terms of working with a rural poll, if you have a specific kind of research question or something, I mean, what does engagement look like with that?
Sure. Like I said, we do the survey in the spring, so we're just finishing up this 2020 survey this year, but we will, in the fall, we start soliciting ideas. So people have information they would like to see in future rural polls. I encourage you to contact us, and we will put that in our list of topics that we will consider, and then our team meets together and decides that. So, you can contact us to see if we already have some data that you might be useful for you, or yes, if there's something in the future that you would like to see, yeah, go ahead and contact us, and we will see if that works and makes sense.
Great, thank you. Sarah, those are the questions that have come in. So if you, mostly, and then the other ones I'm kind of addressing in the chat. So if you have any other questions to kind of wrap it up, I guess, then I think we're good to go.
Terrific. Thanks, Josh. And one panelist, or excuse me, one participant had suggested, in terms of capital or different resources, to reach out to your local economic development districts or your local economic developers, because they may have something that may from the outset not appear to be something that's appropriate or applicable, but having those conversations to see what makes sense depending on what it is from the innovation standpoint that you are pursuing. And as Josh did indicate, connecting with our office, with the Nebraska Business Development Center, and helping to manage those connections. One thing we are good at inside of NBDC is creating partnerships with folks across the state. And all of these folks are new friends of ours, so happy to expand our network in terms of the panel and things like that, and making sure that you, as the producer, as the innovator, or whatever your classification may be, you're connected with various people across the state who are here to help you and to advance economic development and innovation in various industries across the state. So if we are wrapped on questions, I'll dive into some upcoming events and things.
Sarah, can I jump in here real quick? As far as the economic developers and development districts, if there are any questions or if you need some help to make those connections, don't hesitate to let us know. We've got a pretty good network with a lot of the economic development professionals across the state that we can help to make those connections for you.
Right, and just one more plug here for the big initiative we announced today, the Catalyst program. If you want to learn more about that or how to participate, go to our website, nebraskasorghum.org/catalyst. You can also look at our social media pages and even the Pure Nebraska Facebook page. I know they just put up that video segment that they did in making that announcement this morning. You know, we really want to see you be successful because when you're successful, we're successful. So, Brian, we're probably going to have another conversation, you and I, along with OPPD, about really rallying the economic development community around this project. I think it has a lot of great potential, and I know our partners are very excited as we are. So,
absolutely.
So in the beginning, I did talk about this panel of experts as the first event in our series targeted at innovation specifically for agriculture and rural development. And our next event is going into the Small Business Innovation Research Program, overview about that. So you can apply for this federal funding opportunity. USDA is one of those federal funding agencies, and our consortium of events is leading into that application deadline on October 1st. So if you have an innovative idea that fits what the USDA is looking for, or perhaps maybe National Science Foundation working with us to put those proposals together, because it is a competitive grant process and applying for those funds. So we're preparing these events targeted toward that end application date. And so you can learn more about that funding opportunity by joining us for a webinar either on June 9th or 25th. We are doing these 101s twice a month, so many opportunities to join in there. Another webinar panel format that I'm really looking forward to is one with 3 companies from Nebraska that pursued USDA SBIR funding and were approved for either phase 1, the initial phase, or phase 2, where they're refining their commercialization of that technology a little further. Different journeys, different innovations, and great stories to tell about their journey and the whole process. That will be on June 16th. And then the SBIR STTR Road Tour will be coming to Omaha on October 19th. And this is where individuals can meet one-on-one with program managers from those various federal funding agencies. So USDA, National Science Foundation, National Institutes of Health, lots of various federal agencies to talk about how your idea, your commercialization idea might fit into their research priorities. And so that's a great event. They only pick about 13 locations a year. The last time it was in Nebraska was about 4 years ago. So we're looking forward to hosting those folks again and for you to have an opportunity to meet with them. So any of those events you can check out, register at the website below. Always just navigate to nbdc.unomaha.edu to find those events and other ways to engage with our center. We do have consultants across the state for our various programming, and we're happy to help you in whatever way we can. So I want to thank our panelists today. This was a great conversation. I learned a lot, and I hope you did as well as a participant. We will post this recorded video up on our website, Nebraska or nbdc.unomaha.edu. We will email it out to you. If you were registered, we'll go ahead and email that out to you, and then we will share it with our panelists so they can upload as they would like to as well. So thank you again to the 5 of you. We really appreciate it from NBDC and your terrific sharing of knowledge. So with that, we're all wrapped. Everybody have a terrific day. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.